So Fight Chat Friday again, and this time we're taking a look at two competitors who fought in the final of a major championships on a couple of occasions. So we're looking at Katy Laffan from Ireland and Silvia Farigu from Italy, and they've met in the finals of the European Championships in 2015 in Scotland, 2016 then in Finland, and they met again in the final of the World Championships in Ireland in 2017, and all three fights went the one way. So Silvia came out with the gold medal all three times, which is tough. And for Katy, going back in final after final, I'm sure it's a very, very tough prospect to reinvent yourself and come up with a new plan. So what we're really going to focus on in this one is we'll have a look at the final from 2017, which is a really, really, really tight, close match. And then we'll have a look at how Katy evolved her sparring style and tried different things against Silvia over the couple of years. And maybe come back and discuss whether or not all of the changes were a good idea, what's still left to do, as in what didn't work, and maybe look at a broad comparison of, well, is it right to try to change your style to beat a particular person? So maybe we'll jump into the fight first, have a quick look at that from 2017, and then we'll step out and have a look and analyse some of the steps and changes that were made over the previous years that led to that fight. And that's it. The old heart sinks there.
Yeah, just that's one of those ones when it just flips on the end, especially on a warning.
Yeah,
it breaks a lot of hearts. On the other side, then of course, as well as big relief on the opposite side.
Of course, absolutely, and you can see it physically there in Silvia. Like it's, she hasn't really been ahead for that whole match, and it's the first time, because in the previous two matches in Motherwell and in Tampere, Silvia's been pretty much ahead and Katy chasing for the majority of the match. And in this one, yeah, there was the periods where it was level, but it was Katy ahead for quite a bit of it. And coming into that last while, 2-1-1 up, and on one warning with about 20 seconds to go, you know, you'd feel pretty confident there. And I think that's a challenge as well, you know, because that's not a position that Katy had been in before. You know, being 20 seconds away from winning a world title with a warning to spare is not somewhere that most competitors ever get to. So, you know, it's...
And when you flip that then as well, and you look at the whole idea of actually by not leading throughout the whole match is not Silvia's style, because she kind of sits behind that side kick a lot and tries to use good distance management. You can't do that when you have to go and get the fight when there's time.
No.
So props to her for being able to pull that off.
Yeah, she had to very, very quickly change, but I mean, she has quite a few finals experiences and she's been under pressure from time to time as well. So being able to lift it is definitely a characteristic of a top competitor, and being able to lift it when they have to and chase the match. So one of the things that we'd like to do in this video is kind of jump back and look at the evolution of how Katy would have fought against Silvia and the techniques and kind of the strategies that she'd have tried. And so one of the first things that we want to do is, it's kind of mostly from the first round of the fight in Motherwell in 2015, but the same tactic has been used on a couple of occasions where Katy's looked to go to the blind side of Silvia's front leg. So we'll just have a quick look at the clip, and we might talk about them from there.
So this is a go-to technique for a lot of people to try to jump that leg with the front hand, and it's once you get the timing down on this, you can be quite successful with it. It's a nice clean score that people try to pull off. Now it's not as effective here for Katy, simply for the fact that Silvia kind of has that high chamber and she kind of shoots that side kick more elbow to shoulder range more than anything else. So it's quite difficult to get a good clean jump off that to get the distance and almost give a nice visual score compared to if that was a middle side kick.
Absolutely, and one of the things that's working against Katy here is on pretty much each occasion where she does come over the top, even if she doesn't get that first score, and I mean, you'd always, when you're employing this tactic, you'd assume I might not get that first score. You're hoping that you can get a bump on body position and line them up for a kick afterwards, or to be able to follow with hands. And when she gets through, Silvia tends to bump and turn. So she's actually increasing the distance between herself and Katy and putting herself in a position that Katy can't really capitalize on. And it's just one of those things where, like, it's coming from a solid idea. There's nothing wrong with the concept.
Yeah.
It's just that, you know, against Silvia, she's particularly awkward because of, as you've said, that high chamber position and how she's reacting to having her leg jumped. You know, potentially she'll concede a warning. That's the only thing that you might hope for there. But when you're taking such a high risk reward kind of a strategy, like your goal there is you can't get tagged with the side kick, because if you're jumping, that side kick is going to be clear as day if it connects. So you've got to get around it, and when you do get around it, you're hoping that you're going to be in a good position to add a follow on.
And you can see where the thinking is coming from here, because most of the things that we will have a look at here is Katy trying to break that distance down and try to get into a closer range. So that's one option that you have, absolutely. And I think it's definitely a good option when you look at the type of side kick that Silvia has, in terms of it's very relaxed and very calculated. So when you get a side kick like that, it can be a nice one to just get that timing correct and go for it. But as we said, just be based on the body mechanics of Silvia's side kicks, it doesn't really work out.
Yeah, I mean, following the theme, then we look at kind of some efforts to get around the leg and bring your own legs into play. So, you know, in both examples, whether it was jumping the leg or these making a little angle to get her own legs into play, Katy's not contesting the line. She's not contesting that straight line with Silvia. It's deciding, I'm going to work around it. Yeah,
and we can actually see it, as you said, a little bit of evolution there, because this would have been the first year that they fought in Scotland, I think. So you can see that there's a little bit more direct of threatening to go that straight line. And you can see as the fights go on, she comes more and more with angles, which gets her a little bit more success. And if anything, it just takes off the opportunity for Silvia to just hit that side kick directly onto the hip.
Yeah, and when you get that connection with the first leg, so score or not, it is giving Katy opportunities to bring her second leg into it. So one thing that we don't see as much of in the in the current game, is in 2019 Taekwondo. We can't even say 2020 Taekwondo really, but in 2019 Taekwondo is, most fighters, male and female, don't bring the back leg into it as much. It's tended to move back for a lot of competitors to being a front leg fencing game, and Katy being able to bring her back leg in and exploit different angles actually then lets her open up into combinations. So because she's gone into the back leg, naturally she's bringing her dominant leg into play again, or she's coming into hands. And I think there's definitely efficacy in that, and you can see that this part has stayed part of her style through 2015, 2016, 2017, because it gets reward.
Yeah, definitely. And this is actually something that we see Hong do a lot as well with that back leg turning kick. He brings in that back leg turning kick and it sets up the reverse punch then as your feet switch.
Sure.
So it's actually your front hand, but it's your reverse punch. So it's definitely a good option to get around that leg and threaten that opportunity to get some scores.
Yeah, for sure. So the next clip looks at Katy. I've called it angling to hands, but our discussion kind of brought up some other points. But the concept is definitely trying to use the impression of creating an angle, or indeed angling as the punches go. So kind of starting on the direct line, but making an angle as you step into the punch, to again go through, around, under, anywhere through that leg to get into hands.
Yeah, so like one of Katy's biggest strengths, and one of the bigger things she brings to every fight, is her intensity, and you can see that there. She's very intense in terms of her footwork, rhythm, and all these things. So she's very busy in terms of the proactivity on the outside, which sets up these angles and things like that. But as we'll see later on, that can also be almost her kryptonite. So it's just getting that timing right and picking your moments effectively is the key here.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see in this clip like three different ways, from sidestep right left to this is again a little bit more direct line, trying to attack the dropping leg, or even get the hand inside it, and then the little x-ray coming under the leg. It is trying everything, and she has so many techniques in her in her repertoire that she can pick from. Sometimes the challenge is to pick, to establish, right, what is my game. and
finding something that works exactly. Yeah.
And we really do see the contrast with Silvia, because in almost every clip, Silvia's body position, her entry techniques, her setups are very, very similar. Like, she's very comfortable in her posture behind that front leg. And it doesn't always work, of course, but she knows where she's going to next. And I think it is that play between someone who can potentially do everything and someone who, I would imagine the same could be said for Silvia, but who is far more sure of what her core game is. It's like, you know, you can say, if I was a coach preparing Katy for this fight and I wasn't, you know, you could very definitely watch the video and say, this is what Silvia will do, or what she will bring to the fight. I don't know that you can necessarily watch these 3 fights as a coach for another country and say, this is what Katy will do and bring to the fight. So I think that's a difference. And
you know what, that has its good and bad points, because obviously she's very unpredictable, so it's hard to prepare for that and know what's coming. But then on the flip side of that, anybody who's very successful, they will have maybe one particular thing that they're exceptional at and maybe better than all the other competition at. So you need to have that something that you bring that you're almost world class at. If you want to be the champion of a certain division, you need to have something that's your go-to and your stalwart as such.
And again, it's something that I think, you know, Katy certainly has probably a more predictable style when, you know, you would see her as having the advantage in a match. And I think it's just that, you know, from there, when going in against well-known opponents, like, Katy is someone who definitely does her homework. She knows the competitors well. She knows what everybody does. And from that point of view, I think she's a little bit more prone to adapting her style to match the opponent. Whereas against an unknown, she will bring out a far more predictable Katy style. So I think it's just as well, that's just a psychological thing, or not a psychological thing. It's a personal preference thing. You know, again, is it exactly what we would want from all of our competitors all of the time? No, but it's certainly something that can work for you. But
you need to be aware of that self-awareness of where your game foundation is and where the base level springs from, and then you can add on top of those layers as you go, and that's kind of what it's about, really. And you see that in Silvia, she, like, based on the first fight in 2015, the game that she brings in all these clips looks similar enough. Whereas Katy is trying different things, and she's trying to bring a different style, different intensity, all these other attributes that she brings, which, as we noted, may not be ideal when you want to get a job done.
But it is one of those things. If she went back, having lost the first one, did the same thing, you know, in another final and lost again, it brings back that old adage of, you know, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. But, you know, if the result that you got from doing the same thing over and over again is that you win, well, maybe you don't change. So there's a different incentive to try new things there for both Silvia and Katy. One of the other things that was tried, and I think really does play into potential strengths for both fighters, is the ability to clash that front leg. So Silvia is a left-legged fighter, Katy is predominantly a right-legged fighter, and that brings you into a particular situation when it goes front leg to front leg and there's a clash. In particular, where the build is the same, the flexibility range is the same, you'd expect a lot more clashing than happened, we'll say, in Scotland. And we saw a lot more clashing then when we went to look at Tampere and Dublin.
Yeah, and especially I think the whole idea for Katy is to not leave Silvia get her front leg off, which is a solid place to start, because Silvia is quite effective with that front leg, and her distance management and control with that front leg is exceptional. You know, where her range ends and where she can use that leg to just keep you at bay and keep you on the outside of the range where you can do any real damage. So obviously clashing is one option then to take that away from Silvia, and Katy has that ability with having a very good front leg of her own. Now, one thing that I do think is worth mentioning is when Katy does go to clash in these moments here, she's actually coming into range, which creates almost like a coming together, but then because their balance, it will pull them apart again. So it's this idea of you're closing the distance to extend the distance again, so maybe you don't actually get much return on it as you'd hope to do. And we mentioned this in not our episode last week but 2 weeks ago, where of the whole idea of using that front leg and the options of being on top and clashing and things like that. So we'll clip that up the top of the video there for anybody who wants to have a look at that.
Yeah, and as you said, I think there's a potential return if she's actually holding her ground and using the clash as Silvia comes forward. And then when Katy herself is looking to push forward, like that, we're looking for opportunities to have that leg over the top or to be coming through stronger. And so that might involve a shortening step to get you off to a more aggressive start where your body's going to be a little bit taller. And you're going to be able to push through the hips stronger because you've got that little bit of momentum behind you. Or a change in rhythm so that you just catch your opponent as they're already going backwards and they can't bring the leg up to match you. So it's just looking at the different ways that you could clash. And I do think Katy gets a good return from time to time when she gets to the blind side, we'll say, of Silvia's kick. She's able to kind of bring the toe over the hip, bring the hip down and come into hands. And it does happen every now and again. And when that happens, Katy sometimes gets a very nice return on it.
And that's one of the big advantages of clashing, is that you may find yourself in an opportunity where you're like a step ahead of your opponent and catching them in like no man's land for a second, and that's actually one of the big impacts that it can have. But you don't see that advantage really coming from this because of that, because she's closing that distance with the other side as well, so then it just takes away that opportunity for you to be that little step ahead.
So I just pulled out one or two little clips as well of things that are like singular things that maybe happened only once or twice, where we can see here the band-aid that Katy's had to change legs to put herself in this position. And I just picked this one out because it's something that we see people do quite a lot, and I don't really see why Katy wanted to have the change of legs first. For me, I'd love to see that band-aid on the blind side. Just keep... maybe she felt it was necessary to draw a turning kick out of rather than a side kick out of Silvia, but so often Silvia's chamber is high, I kind of feel like you could throw it anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point you bring up, because we don't really see that so often of coming around. So in this clip, for example, it would be Katy on the opposite leg and bringing it around on the back of Silvia and coming down the front of the head. So like it's actually a very good point, and we kind of had a discussion before this video of it actually sets you up quite nicely as well, that you mentioned for the hands. So that's actually something that could feature in this game, especially for Katy when she's looking to close that distance and get rid of Silvia's front leg and take the advantage and from her own point of view to get to the hands. Yeah,
definitely. So the second one then is a little bit, it's just changing legs to match. So on both of these occasions, Katy has matched Silvia's leg, which is, it's a risky choice sometimes, because if you're, right-sided dominant, it's rare that you're going to gain an advantage by going with the other leg in front. Usually that's just a position you end up with as a continuation because you threw a turning kick off your back leg or because you spun or something like that. You'll end up with the other leg in front, and you want to be competent on that side so you can bring yourself back to a good position. But it's rare that you want to, by preference, put it there. But you can do it, and here she does get some advantage out of it because it encourages Silvia to take a different shot than she would typically on the other side.
Yeah, and you make a great point there. Like, if you're the one that has to change leg, it means that you're probably the one that's not in control of this particular sequence. A lot of the time it's to set something up or whatever, but chances are it's because you're trying to make something happen, because what you're doing at the moment isn't maybe working. So that's a good point that you make, that maybe the people that have to switch their legs so often, maybe they're not getting a good return from their dominant side.
Yeah, it's that. And of course, we often have the thing where, if you're dominant on your right, well, maybe you also spin on your right. So, you want the right leg for the reverse turning kick as well. And I don't think that's the case with Katy. She can kick very, very well off both legs. I don't think that's the issue there at all. I think she's looking to pull different shots out of Silvia here. And this one just comes up. But...
for anybody who's listening as well and they're in that similar situation, you can also do this with steps. So rather than actually switching your leg and holding position and waiting, you can actually lead off your normal front leg, and you can either step in or step back with that leg that you have in front to set up that spin on your preferred leg, if that's also an option. For sure.
So with all that we've talked about, it's probably worth coming back to now the fact that the result has been the same through all three matches, and unfortunately for Ireland, for Katy, Silvia has been successful, twice European champion and once world champion from those three fights, and we want to look a little bit at the why. And in this part, I'd kind of like to highlight, some of the improvements that Katy has made in fighting Silvia match after match after match, and how close it did come in Ireland in terms of, taking the win. And maybe we can talk through a little bit of what Silvia is still continuously doing well to keep herself on that top spot, So we've entitled this "When It Goes Wrong" or "What Went Wrong," but only to highlight one or two things that have consistently been a little bit of a problem that, and I want to highlight this from the point of view of it's caused Katy massive trouble and it's caused her to potentially lose fights, but it's actually something as well that she's developed into a strength and she's been really improving on. And it's conceding the warnings here. And we can see there's been a few.
Yeah, and we mentioned this earlier as one of Katy's strengths for setting up angles and things like that, of bringing that high intensity and always busy, always proactive. But then on the flip side, it can sometimes lead her to be a little overzealous, which causes her balance to be off a little bit, which has a positive effect for your opponent. So I think there's times when she could just pick her moments a little bit better with that intensity, and not force things so much a little bit. You can see it here, and it was resulting in a lot of warnings and falling over and things like that. And it's just, if you could just give yourself that half a second extra time to set your feet and maybe go again, I think that she would get a lot better return, and potentially even score shots herself rather than actually falling over and conceding. So she's not only conceding maybe shots on the scoreboard, but also in terms of warnings, which you brought up there earlier, has improved from match to match. Yeah,
so I mean, there was 2 points conceded to warnings in 2015, 1 point in 2016, but with I think 5 warnings, and then it was down to 3 warnings in 2017. And you could see it at the end of the fight. Very unfortunately, the last warning came in the most dramatic style, so that the time had ended. So the warning was given and the scores came in. It's 2-2. Then the warning is given and it goes to 2-1 to Silvia, and that's rough. But you have to kind of look at a marked improvement, because it's the same competitor on a centre stage at a major championships, and it's gone from 6 to 4 to 3 warnings, I think. That's a really good improvement. I think where that's come from has been in the first final in Motherwell. Katy gives up that centre line. She decides to work around the front leg, which necessitates her being a little bit more full facing, working the angles left and right, trying to get around the leg. And when you do that, you're slightly off balance. You're not, you haven't got your centre of gravity as low. You're a little more floaty, and when contacts come, you're more likely to lose balance or travel backwards. And more and more in 2016, 2017, she's clashing more. She's dominating the centre of the ring a bit better. It's a far more even match. And because she's not near the edges of the ring, and because she's not as often travelling side to side with a bit of momentum behind it, she's far more infrequently caught off balance and knocked over, or loses her balance. And I think that's a huge improvement from Katy. And that alone brings her, these are not matches that are separated by 7-8 points. Even in 2015, there are 2 cards where it goes to a 6-point differential, I think, but the other cards are much closer, and that 6-point differential, even you said there are 6 warnings in there. So by the time you come to Ireland, there's 3 warnings each. The differential on the cards is tiny. You've got a very, very even match, and I think it's because more so Katy has taken the initiative in terms of how the match is progressing, how it's being controlled. And I think that's a huge... And
we've discussed this before of having that control, basically with the distance control, the tempo control, which is the intensity that she brings, and also your ring position. So I think that she actually did a great job of getting more control as the fights went on. It just happened to be that Silvia was able to just make that adjustment with maybe 20 seconds to go, and flip the script a little bit, and did a great job of being able to go from that more comfortable and more distance management style to more aggressive. And she did a great job. It's kind of something that actually Katy would do well if it was the other way around, and she acted in the way Silvia did there at the end. I think it would actually suit Katy a lot, based on the speed and intensity that she brings. So as we said, hats off to Silvia there for being able to flip that around in such short time.
And I think it's one of those things that when you watch, the evolution of fighters like that, Silvia has a game plan that she is sticking with, and it's working for her, and there's no reason or there's no pressure on her to change it. Event to event. Within a match, she's having moments when she recognizes there's more pressure here. The game state has changed in this match, and I need to do more. But other than that, she's very comfortable to preserve distance really well, and I think that's her strength. She controls the distance so well with that front leg, varying the length of it, the height of it, and she's able to capitalize on the broken play a little bit. When someone, tries to put on more pressure, she just fades out of there, picks that, defensive shot, and away she goes. And she can do almost all of that work just with that left leg.
And it's what we said earlier, really, though, with the whole idea of having like that pyramid type of an idea of that, having that broad foundation that 90% of your game is going to come from that, and then as you go up, it just gets more narrow as you adapt and adjust to the situations at hand. And I think that's something that Silvia is very, very good at. She has that big solid base where she has that distance management and things like this, and then she adjusts to the play. But not only that as well, if you can go with that style, think about this from 2015, 16, 17, there's been a lot of high level matches where she's been even further developing that style, further practicing that style. So when it comes to a higher level, then again she's able to bring that out because she's done it more. Whereas if you have to adapt and have a different style for every single opponent, you're actually not getting the reps in as such there, because you're doing it different all the time. So you can only prepare for each style based on time a certain amount. So I think that's a massive strength in itself, of having that big broad foundation and just becoming more narrow as you go up, as you need to adapt.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that works for and against Katy. I think and you'd always say Katy can be very exciting to watch because she can pull any shot out, but fundamentally I think where it becomes a challenge for someone who's adaptable like that is when you have a pressure point around a decision. So the game state rapidly changes. You have a momentum swings. You go from being ahead to being behind. You go from being level to conceding a warning. Now you're behind. Or even you get to the position where you have 20 seconds to go and you're in the lead. Those create pressures that, if you're absolutely anchored in what you've always done and you've been in that position many, many times before, you kind of more naturally and more quickly, you have a motor pattern for those, or you have a pattern or some chunking for those decisions because you've been there before and you've made the decisions before and you have some feedback. But when it's new to you, you've put yourself in that position because you've been doing something new or different, or that you've been training less frequently, it's a challenge because now the decision is coming in, and you haven't really prepared for that. You haven't been in that exact situation before. So
when the pressure as the pressure comes on, we naturally revert to what we always do anyway. So we naturally revert to what we know best and how we usually act. You know what I mean? So there's a lot to be said for just having that solid foundation that you can go to at all times, having that go-to where you have that base and you have the confidence in knowing that you're solid in that area.
So I think, if it was to bring a little bit of a summary from what I've got from watching these matches and watching these girls, is that I think in training our own students, I'd really like to establish a solid identity for this, for people in terms of who they are and what they've got, and then introduce a little bit of Katy. So you'd want them to be able to adapt to an opponent on the fly, or following research as Katy does, to add in those extra shots, those extra details, that change of strategy, the plan B. But you really want to establish a very strong fundamental core of plan A for each individual student based on their strengths. So it's not like, Adrian Byrne's plan A for sparring. It's, insert student, here's plan A for sparring. It's based on what they can do. And I think that's the part that you'd really like them to be basing their most challenging decisions on, is like that plan A that they're comfortable with, but with the ability to evolve. Because even if you're the best of the best of the best, if such a thing ever was to exist, if you do just that and you become predictable on it, your rhythm, your timing, your distance, your shot selection is going to be picked apart by the people who are sitting here watching the videos, and someone will solve your problem. So you have to be able to add in a little something new each time. And all of the best competitors over time, they do that. They reinvent themselves.
And it's that idea of like having that broad technical base as a foundation, and the more you kind of get more advanced, then it becomes more tactical and things like shot selection and things like that. So you need to have that foundation in the beginning, and I think that like that's an important point that you made, because when we look at that and how that develops, I think a great thing that anybody could do here would actually be to maybe journal your training a little bit, and each training, each competition, pick out something that went really, really well, and eventually you'll see a little bit of a trend, and you'll see, this happened, and it's happening again, and eventually that will naturally become your base and how you kind of set up everything else.
So I think I would like to bring it back to almost saying your strategy isn't going to change very much from match to match, year to year. It's going to be very, very similar. It evolves very slowly, but your tactics, are the things that you can kind of throw in there and sprinkle like salt and pepper over the match. That you will have a certain tactic or a selection of tactics for a particular opponent or a particular tournament, and those things can eventually become part of your strategy over time. So the big picture doesn't change very much. Your basic game plan doesn't change very much, but over time, based on the tactics that have been successful for you against particular opponents and the things that you sprinkle in, your strategy might evolve.
Definitely, yeah, that's a great point.
So I think that's me for this Friday. So again, we'd like to remind people, if you're enjoying it, do please like and subscribe and share on any social media you'd like to give us a little bit of exposure on. We'd certainly appreciate it. And if you do have suggestions for further or future Fight Chat Fridays, whether it's a match you'd like us to review, a technique, strategy or tactic that needs a little bit of digging into, or even a how-to, so if you've seen something that you've seen someone do and you like it and you'd like to figure out how to coach it, do send us a message, and we'll certainly try and look into that and find examples for you.